I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And thank you so much for spending the next hour with us on this digital town hall. As you know, the Surrey Board of Trade, we are Surrey's city building business organization where we support business and bring business into the city. And we are the only organization with a pandemic rapid response business center to ensure that we are your concierge of connections to the government supports that you need, but also to ensure that you have the on-the-ground research and intelligence for your short-term and long-term business planning. If you need anything, please contact the Surrey Board of Trade. Check us out at businessinsurrey.com. All of our contact information is there. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nation. I'm very pleased to be bringing to you a subject that we've been working on from an advocacy and policy perspective for some time, and that is temporary foreign workers. And it is absolutely still important even during the pandemic and even after the pandemic. I'm pleased to welcome many of our BC government colleagues, but first I'd like to introduce BC's Deputy Minister from the Ministry of Labour. Please help me welcome Trevor Hughes. Trevor, over to you.
Anita, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for being a very valued partner with us on this road with respect to temporary foreign workers and the protection of temporary foreign workers. You've been fabulous to connect with on this and other topics, and also to enable us to reach out to your membership. It's very important that we're able to connect directly with employers, and Surrey is no different than other regions around the province on this topic. So it's great to have you all on the line. I'm joined by three of my staff here who I'm going to pass the line to very quickly. I just wanted to give you a couple of introductory comments. The first thing I just want to make sure we're clear about is we're provincial officials. So we're not responsible for the federal TFW program. We may be able to answer some of your questions about that, but questions about the program itself are really needing to be directed to Canada. This is work that we have been doing for about 3 and a bit years now, to enhance the protections that apply to temporary foreign workers once they're approved by Canada to come to BC to work in your enterprises. This has been something that was reflected in the previous minister, Harry Bains, of course, who most, if not all of you know, because of course he's from Surrey, in his mandate letter from Premier Horgan in July of 2017. And there are a number of stages to the work that's been undertaken. Particularly, we're going to talk to you about the employer requirement that's comes into effect in mid-December. In terms of where we are, it's also important to note that we're in what's called caretaker mode. As you know, we've just had an election. The results are still a little bit preliminary, but pretty clear. It looks like there's going to be an NDP majority, which bodes well for a continuation of a Ministry of Labour and the work that we have started and will continue and take you through in this session. Minister Bains is still the Minister of Labour, but we haven't engaged or dealt with him during the election period or in what's now continuing to be called the caretaker period until a new cabinet is formed, probably the end of this month or into December. So it's possible we may have Minister Bains again as our minister, or we may have someone else. And I'm pretty sure that this government is going to want to, the new government is going to want to continue this important work, which the team will take you through. And so with that very quick introduction, I would like to pass it to Deneen Leduc, who's Assistant Deputy Minister in the ministry and has been, along with John Blakely, leading our work and engagement with stakeholders on this very important work. So I'm going to disappear into the background, but I will show up again for questions because I want you to be focused on the much more talented group that I have working for me on this. So with that introduction, no pressure, Deneen Leduc, thank you.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Anita. We really appreciate being here. So I'm just going to ask Kaylin to load our presentation. And what we propose to do today is give you a quick overview in a PowerPoint deck to provide some of the core information. And then we're actually going to show you the web content that we have created to support employers. And also we're going to give you an overview of the actual form, the application form that an employer would complete if they wish to hire TFWs through one of the LMIA processes. So we'll give you a sense of what kind of information is completed. We've really worked hard to try and balance the ease of the registration process with the need for robust worker protection on the back end. So we'll be interested to hear from you if we've hit the mark today or not. So next slide, please. So before we talk to you specifically about the employer registration process, we just wanted to remind you, you've been our partners in terms of developing the regulation that supported this. We did consultations with you some time ago, more than a year and a half ago now. And so we just wanted to give you a reminder of where we came from with input from you and where we're at now before we talk in detail about the employer registration. So as Trevor mentioned, the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act passed unanimously in the House in November of 2018. And since then, the context of the pandemic and the importance of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program has really been part of the things we've been thinking about as we've implemented this legislation. There's a lot of stakeholders involved in temporary foreign workers and accessing the federal program and using them as an important labor force here in British Columbia. So you'll know, of course, foreign consulates are engaged. Employers, of course, in our business community have been key in terms of providing us with information to help inform the implementation. And the Employment Standards Branch is also in the midst of transforming and modernizing its services. So that's part of the context that we had in mind as we moved to implement the legislation. Next slide. So just a quick reminder of what the legislation does. It's really framework legislation, and it has two key parts. It has a licensing requirement for foreign worker recruiters, and it has a registration requirement for those employers wishing to hire foreign nationals. And we're going to talk a lot more about the registration process today. But just in terms of the legislation overall, it really provides some structure to allow us to hold people to account. So to make sure that licensed recruiters are following the terms of their license. There's compliance and enforcement processes, and there's also a complaints process. You know, one of the things we heard when we were doing consultations with your organization and others is that there were some stories about the odd employer engaging in practices like holding people's passports or otherwise making it challenging for good employers to attract temporary foreign workers. So there are some prohibited practices included in the Act. And we want to be really clear that even though it's called the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, there is no registration of temporary foreign workers individually. This is an overarching regime to protect them using both a licensing regime for recruiters and a registration requirement for employers. So our focus really is to make sure that it's worker protective and really focuses and is targeted on those instances where foreign workers are particularly vulnerable. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John, who is the architect really of the legislation, to talk to you a little bit about the work we've done around the recruiter licensing requirement. John?
Yes, thank you very much. So as Deneen noted, this legislation actually is framework legislation, which is being implemented in two phases. This slide refers to the recruiter licensing requirement, which was actually the first phase of implementation of the legislation. And this requirement has been in place since October 1st of 2019, so just over a year now. Foreign worker recruiters operating in BC are required to hold a license, and these licenses may be held only by individuals, not by corporate entities or corporations. There is no fee to obtain a license, but there is a requirement to post a bond that could be drawn down upon if there are complaints filed against the licensee alleging certain prohibited practices. So the bond could be drawn down upon to make reimbursements to a worker if necessary, if there is a contravention of the legislation. The licensees, their information is published online and form the Registry of Foreign Worker Recruiters. And this is an online searchable registry. So anyone wishing to use a recruiter could access this online registry so that they would know which ones are licensed and in good standing in British Columbia. And to date, there are about 150 recruiter licenses that have been issued. Next slide. So I'll just go on to talk about the second phase of implementation of the legislation, and probably the area that is of greatest importance to you at the moment. So this is a new requirement for employers, or some employers wishing to hire foreign nationals to hold a certificate of registration. And so this is a registration requirement for those employers wishing to employ foreign nationals in BC. If the employers are seeking those foreign nationals through the temporary foreign worker program, and that refers to the sub-bullet under the second bullet, if a labor market impact assessment from the federal government is required in order for the employer to be approved to hire a foreign national. So under that scenario, the employer will need to be registered with the province. And then the other scenario would be employers, which would often be households who wish to hire through the federal home child care provider or home support worker pilot programs. So like the recruiter licensing regime, there is no fee to obtain a certificate of registration. And unlike the licensing regime, there is no requirement to post a surety or bond. The intent here is to make employer registration as easy and as seamless as possible. So those employers that hold a certificate of registration, their information will be posted online through a searchable registry, which would include the business names of the employers who hold the certificate of registration, the date of issuance, expiry date, and any terms and conditions for the registration. So next slide. So I think it's back now to Deneen to talk about the phases of implementation.
Yes, thank you, John. And as John mentioned, we did stand this legislation up in 2 phases, and we learned some best practices from the first phase. One of the things we learned was we needed to make sure that we tested the form with actual users, and so I appreciate Surrey Board of Trade members who offered themselves up to go through this process. So when phase 1 came into force, the regulation was public in July, and we gave a 90-day coming into force period. And so we've done the same thing with phase 2, which is the employer registration. The regulation was public in the end of September, and there's a 90-day coming into force period. So as John mentioned, employers will not have an obligation yet to be registered until December the 15th. So if you already have TFWs, you don't need a certificate of registration. It's only if you're going to access through that labor market impact assessment process, the TFW programs again, as of December the 15th, will you need one. One of the things that we also learned from phase 1 implementation of the recruiter registry was the Director of Employment Standards chose to only issue all licenses for 1 year to give people an opportunity to establish a compliance history with the branch. And so for the launch of the employer registry, the Director of Employment Standards has taken the same approach. All initial certificates of registration will be good for 1 year. And then upon renewal, if your compliance with British Columbia legislation is sound, then those can be issued for up to 3 years. So it doesn't have to be an annual process. And that's our trusted employer stream. So one of the things that was very effective in phase one was a fairly broad public education campaign. And as Trevor mentioned, because we're in this caretaker period, we're not able to do that kind of advertising. So we really appreciate the opportunity to come direct to you and to answer any questions you have, and encourage you to put this information out as broadly as you can. And there will be ongoing employer education, training, and supports well past the December 15th coming into force date. But just so you know, we are really reaching out directly today and appreciate your help in getting the word out. So next slide. So there's going to be ongoing support for employers, and we're happy to do customized training sessions online if that's helpful to anyone or any employers, larger employers particularly, that might want some support. The walkthrough of the online registration process and the web content is what we're going to do next. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that everyone knows there is a 1-800 line that has live simultaneous translation in more than 140 languages, Monday to Friday. If people have questions and want to get further information about the Employer Registry or the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act. As well, there's online information available for people as well, if that's their preference. And so, one of the questions we get a fair bit from employers is, well, I'm concerned I might have had a breach of the Employment Standards Act in the last couple of years. Is that going to limit my ability to access foreign workers? And one of the things we want to make clear is, if an employer made an error in calculating statutory holiday pay or something comparatively minor in terms of compliance, that's not going to prohibit you from accessing the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and getting a certificate of registration from the province. But certainly this is worker protective legislation, and it's designed to ensure that all employers have a level playing field, so that the good employers who treat their employees well are recognized for that, and that the ones that don't, those few bad apples, don't spoil it for everybody. So, if there's a complicated compliance history, then that means that your application for a certificate is going to take longer. Right now, we now have over 350 employers who have come through the process and have published, have received and have publishable information about their certificates of registration, and we'll show that to you early in the next piece of this presentation. But I just wanted you to know that, right now, the branch is turning around these applications an average of 4 business days. But if you're a large employer with a complex compliance history with British Columbia legislation, then that can take longer. So just a little bit of information awareness for you there. And one other piece that employers are very interested in is, while we encourage employers to come through and get their certificate of registrations now before the December 15th date, if they think they're going to need a certificate of registration, if they're thinking of maybe hiring a temporary foreign worker through one of those labor market impact assessment streams over the next year, we understand that this is a new program, and sometimes people don't always know about the obligation to do so. So as part of this demonstration, we'll show you at the end that if an employer applies, they'll get an automatic email from the program saying you've applied, this is your number, and our federal colleagues have agreed to receive that as part of the labor market impact assessment application form. So if an employer hasn't, didn't know they needed one and took some time and still wants to submit their LMIA application, they can, and then Canada will check the online public registry when they're processing their file to see if the certificate of registration has been granted. And if not, the application will stop. But if so, there's no need for employers to provide any further information or documentation to support that. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to my colleague, Kaylin Shirk. She's going to walk you through the online web forms that we've prepared, as well as the actual employer registration, so you can see what it looks like and what kind of information will be publicly available. And then we'll walk you through the actual application form fairly quickly, but to give you a sense of how much time it takes. And again, our approach is really trying to make this process quick, easy, free for employers, but still robust and worker protective on the due diligence process in Employment Standards Branch, so that there's a balance there of these important interests, and so that employers can access the force they need while workers are protected, and those good employers are really getting a benefit and are recognized as being good employers over time. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Kaylin. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deneen. So on the screen now, you should see the picture of the landing page for the Hiring Temporary Foreign Workers website. If any of you have accessed this for information with regards to recruiters, this is the same website that you would have gone to. Across the bottom, we have 3 buttons, one on registering to hire foreign workers, one on applying for a recruiter's license, and a third one on the search of the employer registry. So I'm going to click into the search for the employer registry, as that's the one that Deneen was referencing earlier, so you can see what information is available on the registry. Right now we have 2 options. We can search for the list of all licensed recruiters, or we can search the list of registered employers. So I'm going to click into the registered employers section here, and it's going to take me to the listing. And I think there's a question in the chat asking about what information would be public, and this is a summary of that information. So right now, this is everyone who's has applied for a registration and has been granted that certification. And so you can see that only information that's public here is employer name, and that includes the legal business entity and any operating names that they provided to us, the effective date that it was issued until it is expired, and then an indicator yes or no as to whether or not there are any terms and conditions to that application. I'm going to jump back to that landing page again, and we're going to go now into the actual registration site and intake form from there. When you get into the registration pages, we have some very detailed information for you around who is required to register. So we've got, as Deneen mentioned, those LMIA stream programs as well as the 2 pilot programs here. And then we have a link to go right into that registration if you know what you're here for. We've got some more information as we scroll down around what happens when you become an employer, or if your application is not approved, what the process is for reconsideration, if there's additional details that we need to be or should be made aware of. And then we have that link to search for registered employers once they're done. So that's the same page that we had just visited. We have additional information on the labor market impact assessment process that you can go off to see at the federal level, as well as some information for you about the obligations under law with the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, as well as some information on employment standards and WorkSafe here. And then finally, just a contact section here, isn't it? As Deneen mentioned, we do have a 1-800 number with Monday to Friday service in over 140 languages if that's a support that you're looking for. So scrolling back up, I'm going to go into the Register to Hire Foreign Workers button here. And that takes me into the quick summary page of the information that I'm going to need for the application, as well as a little note that it's only going to take you about 15 minutes to go through that process. We have a link to what the federal requirements are here, as well as the summary of information that we're going to be asking you for as part of the application to help you prepare for going through the process. The application is start to finish. It should take you about 15 minutes, but there's no option to save. Once you do start the application, the expectation is that you'll be able to complete it in one sitting, and you're not going to be returning to this page. So I'm going to get started into the application here. This is where we start by capturing some information about your situation so that we can provide you with the appropriate application for your circumstances. The first question is regards whether or not you're a business hiring temporary foreign workers, or if you're an individual household hiring perhaps a nanny or a caregiver. So in this application, I'm going to do it for a business. The next question we ask you is with regards to the type of employer, if you're a corporation, sole proprietorship, partnership, etc. We do this because the information that we ask for on the business side is different depending on which business type you select. The next question is around whether or not you're registered in BC. I'm going to say registered so I can show you the integration with our BC registries that we've built in. And then whether or not you're using a public or private computer just helps us protect your data by creating a shorter timeout window if you're on a public device. The last question we ask is whether or not you're providing accommodation to your workers. This would be, again, appropriate if you're in a caregiver or in-home nanny situation. So I'm going to select no for the purpose of this application today. So once I get into the application, you can see I've got 7 sections that I need to complete. My business type has been listed here as corporation. If I've made a mistake, I can go back and change that. My business is saying that I indicated that it's registered in BC, so that helps guide the information in the application, as well as it gives me a status update as to how far along in the application process I am. And you can see once we are finished the application, there's a review and submit paid button down here, but it's inactive until I get to that stage. So the first section here is the employer section. And I indicated that I was a registered entity in British Columbia. And so we have an integration with what's called OrgBook, which does a lookup into BC registries for the legal business entity name. And then we'll pull back the BC registry number for us. So that's a piece of information that you may not have readily available at your fingertips. So we've done that lookup for you. And then we can verify that we've actually got the right spelling and name convention for the business, as well as the correct business registry number. The next, we ask for some general information about whether or not there's other names that your business might be operating as, that other people maybe know that business as. We ask you whether or not you possess a valid business license, and then ask for the business license number as well as for you to upload a file if that's appropriate for you. If you don't have one at this point, then the answer for that is no. Contact phone number for the business, and then website is optional. For the mailing address of the business, we have integration again with what's called the BC geocoder. As I was typing my address information pops up to complete my address for me. And so all I have to do is enter the postal code as appropriate, if appropriate for that particular address. And then for the business address, we give you the option of using the mailing address again or using a different address for whichever is appropriate. Save and continue takes me back to the page, and I can see that I've got a completed check mark as well as a 1 of 7 steps complete on my application. So I'm going to jump into the next section, which is the director section. And because I indicated I was a corporation up front, that's why I'm seeing the director section here. If I had indicated I was a partnership, I would be looking for partner information, or a sole proprietorship, I'd be looking for business owner information. For the purpose of today, I'm going to use myself here. And then we do ask for, give you the opportunity to indicate pronouns if appropriate, or if desired for the individual contact, so that we can respectfully address them if we need to engage in conversation. And then for the directors, you'll notice that our email address is optional. The only information that we require is the first name and a phone number here. And then for the mailing address, we give you the opportunity to reuse the business address. So understanding that there may be a large number of directors involved in a particular corporation, we wanted to be able to get the information that we do require, which is the names and contact information for the directors, but be as minimally, ask for the minimum amount of information so it's not cumbersome to enter at this stage. And if I had entered someone's information incorrectly, I can also use the remove director button here to add someone else. So I'm going to hit save and continue here. And instead of going back to the main page, I get taken back to the addition page. So we do want a complete listing of all directors. So at this point, I'm asked if this is all directors for this corporation, or if I need to add another director. Adding another director just takes me back to the same page where I'd be looking to add that information again. And again, I only need to add the name and the phone number, and then I can tie them to the business address as is appropriate. So coming back here, I'm now 2 of 7 steps completed. So I'm going to go into the contact person. And I've already entered one person into the system, so it's asking me if that's the person who I want to use as the contact person, or if there's someone else who's appropriate. So today I'm going to use someone else, because the director is not who I want to have be the contact for my business. So I'm going to use Deneen, and I'm going to go through for her, but I'm going to use my own email address just for the purpose of our demo. And then a phone number. So because this person is a contact person and not necessarily just the director that we're looking to reference, we do require an email address as well as a phone number for them. And again, I have the option to use an existing address or use a different address. If I choose to use a different address, I will get the same opportunity with the BC geocoder popping up and trying to autocomplete my address as I start to type it. Save and continue takes me back to the landing page now, and I've got my 3 steps completed. So into activities and services, we're asking here rather about the industry for the employer. So not the individual industries that the employees may be hired into, but the individual or the industry that the employer is operating in. And if there's any questions about what the classification is, we do reference off to the NAICS code list to help you identify what your industry is. So for today, I'm going to say that I'm looking at a construction business. And then we ask you to provide some details around the activities of that business. So it's a very small field here. It's only about 250 characters. So we're just looking for a brief description. Going back to the main page here, the section 5 is what are the work locations for the foreign workers that you're looking to hire. Again, we've collected some addresses along our application, so I have the opportunity to say that they're working at the business address or this associated address or at a different address. And for the for the work locations, what we are asking for is just the street address and the city, understanding that these may be our physical addresses that are not tied to a postal code, so that information is a little bit pared down. And you are also given the opportunity to add multiple work locations within this form. So again, if you have 3 sites that you'll be using workers on, you can do all 3 sites within one application, assuming they're under the same business. So I'm going to save and continue with that. The next section here is the additional details page, and this is where we ask for the most details around the business and the proposed hiring of workers. The first question is optional. It asks you what the current size of your business is in terms of number of employees, and we're looking for a range, just an approximate understanding of how big that business is. The next question we're asking is around how many foreign workers do you intend to employ? And again, as this is a pre-step to the LMIA process, this number may be a little bit more of an estimate at this stage, and that's totally fine. As you'll see, we've given you a range because we do expect there to be some flexibility on that as the application process goes. The next question is around which job duty categories are you hiring? The previous time we were talking about the NAICS codes and the industry that the employer was operating in, and this particular question is looking for the NOCS or the National Occupation Code classification for the workers that are coming in. So I had said that I was hiring, my business was operating in construction, and for this application I'm hiring into trades work. The next question asks about whether or not you've previously hired or registered to hire workers in Canada. If yes, we're going to ask you for the jurisdictions that you've hired into previously. As time goes on, this question will evolve as the registry is live for longer, but for this year, we're looking to see what sort of previous experience you may have had with hiring foreign workers. We ask as well if you know where you intend to recruit from. For some programs, this may be appropriate. For others, it may not. So we would give you the opportunity to provide us those details here. We ask you as well for your WorkSafe BC registration number and your WorkSafe BC clearance letter. These are 2 documents that we indicated at the start that we will be asking for as part of the application process. If you don't have it at this time, again, because it's a pre-step, that's something that our due diligence process will follow up for and look for once your application comes through. Farm identification number, if appropriate, in the agricultural sector. That would be another piece of information that we're asking for here. And then the final 2 questions are, again, go to our due diligence process. The first question asking whether or not anyone involved in the business here has been subject to formal insolvency. If yes, we have a box here for you to be able to provide some context and give some more additional information. And then the last question is around whether or not anyone has been found to be in non-compliance with some of the following. Save and continue. Oh, I answered yes. I'm just going to put test in there for now and save and continue. The last step for the application is a contact person. So understanding that this application may be completed by legal counsel, it may be completed by someone who's helping you with the recruitment and hiring for your foreign workers, we wanted to give the opportunity to identify someone else who's not necessarily the director or the business contact as being the contact person for this particular application. So for this application, I'm just going to use someone who's got the name contact person. And again, similarly, we ask about pronouns. And then we ask you a question around whether or not they're assisting with the recruitment or hiring of foreign workers. And this in the back end helps us understand and link back to the registry for licensed recruiters. And so if someone's helping with recruitment, that's an indication to us that we should be looking to see if they're licensed to do so in British Columbia. The next question helps us paired with that previous information. If yes, you're helping with hiring recruitment, but you're the HR professional for your business, that's an appropriate linkage. And so we want to have an understanding of that. Or if they are not, and so if I'm saying that I'm the recruiter, that gives us that information, helps fill in those details. So for the contact person, again, we do require both a email address as well as a telephone number for that person so that we can get a hold of them. And then for the mailing address, again, because we may have already entered this address, we don't want to have to duplicate entry. I'm going to just use the previous address for the business as the contact address. Save and continue. So now I have all my check marks complete. My application status is now ready for review, and my review and submit application button is now active. So clicking on that, I get taken to a summary page. And this is a summary page of all the information I've completed through the application. So I have my employer information complete with my BC Registry's number, some information about whether or not I have a business license. If I had indicated more directors, all of those names would appear here. My contact person at the business, the activities and services, I said that I worked in construction. Any work locations, again, if you had multiple work locations, they would all appear here. And then on the additional details page, it's only the questions that I've provided answers to that appear on this page. Finally, my contact person for my application comes up, and you can see here that I've indicated that they're assisting with the recruitment or hiring, as well as their relationship to me as recruiter. So that's important for us on the back end. And then finally, I have 3 confirmations to do with regards to the information being true, understanding what that means under the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, as well as a reference to the Protection of Privacy Act. So I'm going to submit this, and I'm going to get taken to a confirmation page. And that review and submit page that we were just on, a copy of that gets sent to that contact person that I've indicated on the application page. So on this thank you page, I get an application number and I get a date that my application was submitted. So on the next steps, I have that a confirmation has been sent to the contact person. So that contains all of the review and submit page information that was submitted as part of the application and a reference to that application number. Next steps after that is that the contact person or the business contact will be contacted by the delegate of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program to have any dialogue that's needed to follow up with regards to the processing of that application. And then just questions or email or comments can go to an email or a phone number here as well for the application process. Deneen?
Great, thank you very much for that, Kaylin. So just before we navigate away from this page, this is the page that if you're an employer and you wait until December the 15th to apply for your labor market impact assessment as well as your certificate of registration. If you apply for the certificate of registration and you receive this email, you can include this email with your LMIA application and Canada will keep processing it. And then they will check back on the public online registry and see if you have been granted a certificate as they're going through processing your file. So there's no delay in this interim transition period time. But you will not be able to get a labor market impact assessment if you do not have a certificate of registration on or after December the 15th. So we really want employers to know if you're thinking ahead and thinking that you may be hiring a temporary foreign worker in the next year, you should be taking steps to go through this certificate of registration process. Because again, while it is quite quick right now based on our current volumes, that could change if volumes increase. As well, your compliance history and the size of your corporation will impact the processing time for your file. So our average processing time is 4 business days right now. Our public service standards are about 2 weeks is what we tell people to expect. But again, it does depend on a compliance history because there is a robust due diligence process that happens within the branch. So that's the end of the presentation in terms of an overview of what we've been doing and implementation steps to date. We're wide open here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Deneen, and everyone for that great presentation. And a lot to get through. And certainly the Surrey Board of Trade, we've already put it in our newspaper, which is sent to every single business in the city. And of course, through our social media networks, and we'll do more of that. I see that some of the questions in the chat function have been answered, but if there are any questions, please put them in the chat function now. We have a good 20 minutes before we conclude. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions while we're waiting for others. Is a third of Surrey's land base is agricultural, and many of our farmers, for example, they need temporary foreign workers. And so what advice do you have to them in terms of timing, in terms of worker needs? Do they communicate with you sooner rather than later for next year? Or what advice can you give to them?
So thank you, Anita. I'll start with that one. So absolutely, we encourage our agricultural sector employers to come through the process early. And I think you'll see if you take a look at the online registration process with all the completed certificates in the actual registry, there are a lot in there already. Given sort of the timing, often farmers are starting to hire now for the next year's planting. So if you think you're going to need one by December the 15th or forward, by all means, you should get a certificate of registration. But if you already have an LMIA process in stream or in flight, you don't need one for this year's process. John, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I guess the point that our work isn't involved in sort of assessing the labor market needs or anything like that. That is all through the labor market impact assessment process, which falls within the federal jurisdiction. So really it boils down to the question of whether a farmer is planning to recruit sometime after December 15th. And if they are, then they would be subject to the registration requirement.
Okay. And so some questions here from the audience. Can you please confirm whether the requirement to register also applies to employers using the global talent stream?
John, do you want to answer that? I mean, the short answer is yes.
Yeah. The short answer is yes. If the employer is required to apply for a labor market impact assessment, then the registration requirement would apply. There are other streams under the International Mobility Program where there would not be the registration requirement, but to the extent that people are brought in under the global talent stream of the temporary foreign worker program, the registration requirement would apply.
I might just add, thank you for that, John. That's absolutely correct. I might just add that we have occasionally had an employer who has needed someone under the global talent stream in very, very tight timelines. And if that's the case, we do encourage that you reach out to the branch through the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Unit and let them know that you've applied for a certificate of registration and that there is a time limit around that particular stream, just so that you're not disappointed in terms of if you're a large employer with a complicated processing history, the branch will make efforts to process that.
So the next question is, I'm not sure I understand it fully, but does a business registration all across the board, is that needed even if you hire someone under the work permit program? Do you understand what's being said there?
So I'm not completely sure. We've tried to be clear that not every employer wanting to hire a foreign national is going to require a certificate of registration. It's those employers that want to hire foreign nationals through the temporary foreign worker program that in those labor market impact assessment streams. So the employers should know if they need to go through that labor market impact assessment process. If you do, you need a certificate of registration. Does that answer the person's?
Enrique, do you want to just, I've allowed you to talk. If you wanted to just expand upon that, please.
Yes, thank you, Anita. I appreciate that. Yeah, so the question is regarding the registration on that for the foreign workers. Sometimes we are a recruitment agency in BC, but sometimes we get applications from outside of Canada. And so, but they don't, the employers in Canada not necessarily looking to hire short term, they want to keep them long term. So would that affect them regardless? Should they register as well, or they can just go ahead and just, let's say, take care of us as we were before? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
John, do you want to try that one? I think the employer's in British Columbia, which would mean if the employer and the job is in British Columbia, a certificate would be required.
Yes, and if the even if the longer term intent is for the worker to remain in Canada permanently, if they are brought in initially under the temporary foreign worker program, the registration requirement would apply. Now, there is, of course, the provincial nominee program, which is separate and apart from this. If someone is being brought in under the provincial nominee program, that does not require the person to first be brought into BC under the temporary foreign worker program, then the registration requirement would not apply.
Okay, our next question is, what do you mean by certificate registration number? Is it the same as your business registration number?
No, the certificate of registration is a number that will be issued to you if you are successful in your application for a certificate of registration. So you'll get a discrete number on your form that will be emailed to you, your certificate, that will be unique to you.
Is this employer registry available throughout Canada or just in BC?
So the employer registry is visible and certainly searchable throughout Canada, but it applies for employers in wanting to hire for BC jobs. So if you're a Saskatchewan employer, but you have a British Columbia operation and you want to hire for your British Columbia job, you will require a certificate of registration, even though you might live in Saskatchewan. It's based on where the job is.
Okay. Any other questions, audience? Please put it in the chat function. Any closing remarks? Trevor?
Well, before we get to that, I just wonder if the housing question was that showed up earlier was answered.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So I interpreted that question a couple of different ways, and so maybe I'll take an initial crack at it and invite my team to weigh in, adding or taking away from what I say, and then we can maybe see if John Kearns as we've answered his question. So I read that as concern about housing issues in both supply and how issues related to housing are being addressed. So I can confirm for you that issues related to housing are very much front of mind for the province. The Ministry of Labor doesn't regulate all the aspects of housing for temporary foreign workers, and that's because there are other authorities. For example, the Ministry of Health has what's called the Industrial Camps Regulation. That's one aspect. So it's multi-jurisdictional, both within the province. There's also housing inspectors that are private. There's also requirements of the federal TFW program itself and the arrangement that they've negotiated with some of the countries that send us workers. So it's a bit complicated, but I know that Canada has recently engaged a process to do some review of some of these issues because they're aware that COVID has complicated issues related to housing for TFWs. I'm not sure I can answer your questions about supply, other than supply of TFWs will continue to be an issue, I understand, for employers, and it's really up to Canada what they decide to do with the TFW program. But as long as that program is there and available for employers, you will be able to register for access to it from here. And then the terms and conditions of the workers once they get here will be something that we're involved in. So I'll stop there and see if John or Deneen have anything further they'd want to add with respect to John's question. And it may be that there's something that popped up at the bottom of the chat. Nope. So I'll stop there.
So it's Deneen here. No, there's really nothing I would add except to say that, there is a section of the form that will capture accommodation information if you, the employer, indicate you're going to provide it. And there's a series of questions there where we ask you to identify where are you going to be housing them. And that's really for compliance and enforcement activity that may occur after the fact. So there is an accommodation piece if you are providing it as part of the employer certificate of registration form. We actually didn't show you that part because most employers don't provide it. But if that's the case, we do collect that information and it can be used for compliance and enforcement purposes.
John?
John?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Just
Okay.
one last
Mm.
question I have, Trevor,
Mhm.
before you close, is temporary foreign workers, do they have any WorkSafe BC protections, or how does that alignment work?
So what I would say about that is anybody that is performing work in this jurisdiction is covered by the workers' compensation regime. And in fact, we've partnered with WorkSafe BC on a number of initiatives, including the work that WorkSafe does in their own right with, for example, the Mexican consulate, where they actually engage in training of workers before they even ever come here. And so there are a number of ways that WorkSafe is engaged on this particular piece. Often what ends up happening in certain circumstances is they go in and do a random inspection and they see and hear a number of things that they end up having to refer elsewhere. So for example, if there's an employment standards issue, well, that's not their authority, they pass it on. If there's a housing issue, they can pass that on as well. And it ends up all being part of the TFW Protection Act enforcement mechanisms, because ultimately, if it turns out that an employer is violating the Workers' Compensation Act, for example, with respect to its workers, it doesn't have to just be limited to the Employment Standards Act or the TFW Protection Act. We can take action. So it's all wrapped together as part of a holus bolus, if I can be technical in terms of answering that question. But they're very much engaged with us in this work. And really, at the end of the day, it's one of those things that from a WorkSafe BC perspective, it doesn't matter where your point of origin is. It really only matters to them if you're a worker.
We do have two last questions, since we do have some additional time before concluding remarks. Trevor, do you provide any assistance or guidelines for Global Talent Stream?
I need help from my team on that one.
Yeah, so it's not, we do provide guidance and advice for all employers. It's not unique to the Global Talent Stream. But if you would like specific information, if as an employer going through that process about what your certificate of registration, the process is the same, but there's some timing aspects that you might want to engage with the branch around. We invite you to call that 1-800 line, or you can email the BC TFW Protection Unit at any time, and we can send you along that email as well.
Are you able to provide a resource that has information about housing? Is there another database that provides information on housing standards?
John, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, through our legislation, I think the answer would be no. Under certain immigration streams, like the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, there are housing standards written into the basically the contract that governs the terms under which farmers are allowed to bring in foreign nationals under the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program. There are similarly standards or expectations with respect to housing that apply to temporary foreign workers and their employers under the agriculture stream. And it is primarily in the agriculture stream where housing is an issue, along with home support and caregiving. In this day of COVID and the pandemic and public health orders, another source of information would be the provincial health officer orders and information posted on the provincial health officer's website.
And the last question is related, and I imagine this is a Canadian government response, not a BC government response, is clarity around countries that send us workers. Are there any particular countries or some clarity around that in the chat function?
Yeah, I mean, I referenced Mexico. A lot of employers, particularly in the agriculture stream, there's a seasonal agriculture worker program. It's SOP is the acronym, and so Mexico is the primary country that sends us workers under that program. But we get temporary foreign workers from the Philippines, from other Central and South American countries, and so there's really no limitation there. I just used Mexico as the example with respect to answering the WorkSafe BC question.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Over to you for concluding remarks, please.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your participation and for your questions. I just want to reassure you that there are no dumb questions. If you think that there's something that we haven't addressed or that's puzzled you or that comes up after the fact, please reach out. We're here to help and provide advice and assistance to you. We recognize that this is an additional bit of work for you to do with respect to your ability to access temporary foreign workers. We've tried to balance that by using the process that Kaylin took you through in the website, by making it as quick and easy and painless as possible, with the fact that, you know, it's very important for us to be able to track where temporary foreign workers are to make sure that they are getting all the protections that they're entitled to, recognizing some of the limitations of the temporary foreign worker program when they get here. For example, closed work permits. I think you understand the significance of that. So we think we've hit the mark, but we recognize that this puts an onus on you and potentially could have implications for you as an employer if there is a misunderstanding or a misapplication of the law. So please do ask questions, avail yourself of us as individuals, the resources that we've got for you. If we need to provide further sessions or provide some further assistance, please ask. I mean, if the answer is, well, we can't help you there, hopefully we can at least figure out where to send you, for example, if it's to Canada with questions about the TFW program. But please do reach out. And I really, really appreciate Anita and her team for allowing us to have this opportunity with you, facilitating it and giving us access to you, because you are the folks on the front lines of doing this work and employing these individuals from outside the jurisdiction. And we know you want to do it right. So we're here to help. So with that, and again, of course, thanks to my team, who as always do a fabulous job. They're the ones who understand the nitty-gritty and the elements of this and are indeed the experts. I very much appreciate their expertise here today. So thank you all.